Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to a brand new season of Beyond the Mind with Ani. This season, we are embarking on a journey through the story of the feminine, from its earliest roots of sacred power, intuition, and wisdom, all the way to modern liberation. We'll explore how women were honored, feared, and systematically suppressed across history, how goddess worshipping tribes, matriarchal societies, and early civilizations once held women as central, powerful, and sacred, and how patriarchal systems slowly rewrote that story to control, diminish, and silence feminine energy. We will dive deep into myths like Lilith and Eve, unpacking the shadows that cast on generations of women and reveal how these ancient narratives still influence patterns of self-sabotage, shame, and hidden limitations today. Along the way, we'll meet the women who define the system, explore global feminist movements, and examine how women have reclaimed voice, power, and presence against tremendous odds. And most importantly, this season is about you stepping fully into your own feminine power through conscious self-love, embodied boundaries, polarity, shadow work, and rituals. You'll learn to break cycles, heal generational wounds, and claim your voice, desire, and magnetism unapologetically. I want you to remember this. Before kings and empires, before written laws and borders, there were women. Not as side figures, but as the heartbeat of community, as keepers of wisdom, and as the sacred link between earth and spirit. The story of the feminine begins long before patriarchy, and to understand our present, we must remember our beginnings. Anthropological evidence reveals that in early human societies, women weren't just part of the story, they were often the central force shaping it. Many hunter-gatherers and early agrarian communities were matrifocal or egalitarian, meaning lineage, inheritance, and spiritual life often revolved around women. Here, power wasn't measured by conquest, domination, or aggression. It was measured by wisdom, connection, and the ability to sustain life. Women were the original keepers of knowledge. Healers, midwives, teachers, and decision makers, guiding communities in ways that ensured survival. Take ancient Anatolia, 7000 BC. Archaeological studies show a society without rigid hierarchy, warfare, or male-dominated rule. Its walls are adorned with murals celebrating fertility, communal life, and balance. Figurines of women holding symbols of abundance suggest deep veneration of female creativity and spiritual authority. Women weren't just reproducers, they were architects of civilization, leading in agriculture, weaving, food preservation, medicine, and ritual. The first technologies of human life, from textile to early farming, were largely in women's hand, shaping the culture, survival, and cohesion of their communities. Other examples abound. Early Native American matrilineal tribes show women controlling property, governance, and spiritual rituals, a recurring pattern of female-centered power across continents. Beyond practical leadership, women were the original keepers of wisdom, survival dependent on understanding the natural world, plants, seasons, medicinal herbs, childbirth, and food preservation. And women held this knowledge sacred. Oral traditional stories and rituals ensured that this wisdom survived across generations long before writing existed. Women acted as teachers, healers, and spiritual guides, mediating between the visible worlds and the mysteries of life, death, and cosmic cycles. Consider midwives and herbalists across cultures. They held secrets of the body, fertility, and healing that were central to community survival. In ancient Mesopotamia, priestesses of Inanna performed sacred rites and divination, guiding kings and societies with divine knowledge. In African matrilineal societies, women controlled agriculture, medicine, and governance, proving indispensable to societal cohesion. Even the goddess figurines from Anatolia reflect women as living vessels of wisdom, life-giving energy, and spiritual authority. So think about it. Wisdom is power. The fear patriarchal system developed around women wasn't about controlling female bodies. It was about controlling knowledge itself. When half of humanity holds the key to life, growth, and survival, how can the other half dominate? Reclaiming this aspect of femininity today, our intuition, ancestral knowledge, and ability to perceive beyond the surface is not just personal growth. It's a return to a lost source of power, a revival of blueprint of feminine leadership that can restore balance in our modern world. Across the world's earliest civilization, goddess worship wasn't a side note. It was the heartbeat of spirituality. Long before monotheism, the divine was imagined not as distant father figure, but as a living and breathing mother. Inanna, in Sumer, 4000 BCE, she ruled fertility, love, sex, and war. Inanna embodied wholeness, the erotic and the destructive, creation and chaos. Her myth reflect a worldview that honored the complexity of feminine power rather than reducing it to nurturing only. Or Isis in Egypt, known as the mother of all, Isis was healer, she was magician and guides of souls. She resurrected Osiris, taught agriculture, and protected both the living and dead. Her worship spread so widely that temples dedicated to her stood across the Roman Empire. Shakti in Vedic India, more than a goddess, Shakti was the very cosmic life force itself. Even masculine gods were powerless without her. This philosophy placed feminine energy not as other, but as the primal origin of creation. But goddess worship wasn't just about myth. It was also about the body. Women's body themselves were treated as sacred text. In many indigenous cultures, menstrual huts were not just about shame. They were about rituals. Women were seen as entering heightened state of intuition and vision, offering wisdom to guide their people. Birth rituals weren't hidden in silence. They were celebrated as public and spiritual events, honoring the women as a literal portal between the unseen and seen. Why? Because ancient people recognized that the most obvious cosmic alignment of all, the link between the menstrual cycle and the moon. The menstrual cycle averages 28 days, nearly identical to 29.5 days lunar cycle. This wasn't a coincidence. This is cosmology. New moon equaled menstruation, seen as time of release, renewal, and vision. In Native American moon lodges, bleeding women were honored as dreamers and prophets. Waxing moon equaled follicular phase, a phase of growth mirroring rising energy and creativity as seeds of new life, literal and metaphorical. And full moon equaled ovulation, celebrated as a peak of fertility and abundance. In many cultures, festival tied to the new moon honored feminine sexuality as a sacred force of creation. In this alignment, women were seen as living embodiment of cosmos. Their blood was considered sacred, sometimes returned to the earth as nourishment. In African and indigenous tradition, it was revered as life-giving essence. Women were timekeepers of the universe, carrying the cycle of life, death, and rebirth within them. So think about it. If women's bodies were once honored as sacred sites of wisdom, is it any wonder that patriarchal system worked so hard to damage that connection, to strip menstruation off its sacredness, to turn childbirth into silence, to recast that divine feminine into shame. Perhaps the greatest theft of patriarchy wasn't land or power. It was the rewriting of the body itself as impure rather than divine. And here's a part of history often glossed over. Women weren't erased because they were weak. They were repressed because their power was immense, undeniable, and terrifying to those seeking control. For millennia, women carried knowledge of life and death, childbirth, midwifery, herbal medicine, healing, prophecy, astronomy, and sacred rituals. And knowledge is power, and power always invites fear. This wasn't theoretical influence, it was practical, life-sustaining authority. Women held the secrets of survival, of health, continuity, and that made them indispensable and dangerous in the eyes of emerging patriarchies. Female intuition embodied wisdom and spiritual insight, created an aura of mystery that could not be fully measured or controlled. Even in societies dominated by men, rulers often relied on women as advisors, healers, and oracles because their guidance shaped decisions, wars, and alliances. In Greece, for example, the Oracle of Delphi didn't simply tell fortunes. City-states consulted her before battles, laws, and colonization. Her words could legitimize or undo kings. In Mesopotamia, priestesses of Inanna performed rituals that sanctified rulers, ensured crops, and maintained social order. They carried sacred knowledge of celestial cycles, fertility rites, and divination that guided entire civilizations. In Egypt, Isis cults endured for centuries, outliving dynasties, shaping religious thought and societal norms. Pharaohs depended on priestesses to perform rites that maintained cosmic balance, and even male magicians deferred to the wisdom of female healers. In Native American matrilineal tribes, women controlled property, decision-making, and spiritual practices, choosing chiefs and guiding councils, a combination of political, spiritual, and social power that patriarchal colonizers could not easily undermine. And in Africa, Yoruba priestesses of Oshia worship yielded authority over fertility, agriculture, and divination, advising kings and mediating disputes, often holding as much sway as the monarchs themselves. Women's power was both visible and hidden, too essential to erase, yet too threatening to fully allow. Patriarchal system didn't simply attempt to destroy women. They redefined their roles, rewrote their stories, and criminalized their knowledge, turning life givers into witches, heretics, or temptresses. Now, think about it. Imagine what it means when half of the humanity holds wisdom you cannot control. Fear isn't just reaction, it's strategy. The fear of women's innate power explains centuries of suppression and culture myth-making. And yet, the truth remains. The very knowledge that frightened empires still flow in our veins today. Intuition, creativity, nurturing life, knowledge, waiting to be reclaimed. Patriarchy wasn't just about men ruling. It was about containing what could not be controlled. Women's bodies, mind, and spirits held immense power, the ability to feel deeply, to create life, to bleed and heal without dying, to sense patterns, cycles, and rhythms invisible to the logical, linear worldview of patriarchal structures. To those invested in control, this was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. A woman's body, her sexuality, her intuition, her creativity became framed as chaotic, dangerous, or unclean, not because it was inherently so, but because it refused to fit in the rigid, linear, and hierarchical system of authority. The very aspect that made women powerful, their life-giving ability, their cyclical connection to nature, their emotional and spiritual intelligence were exactly what needed to be contained. The European witch hunt between 15th and 18th centuries weren't random acts of cruelty. There were systemic campaigns to eradicate women's independence, spiritual authority, and folk knowledge of healing and herbs. Midwives, herbalists, and outspoken women were labeled witches, tortured, or killed. Their knowledge, medicine, childbirth, prophecy was deemed too dangerous for male-dominated structure. Lilith, in Mesopotamian and Jewish traditions, was cast as the eternal rebel, the woman who refused male domination, independence personified, feared, and demonized for her autonomy. She became the archetype of dangerous femininity, an eternal warning of the power men could not control. And Christianity divided women into two extremes: Eve, the sinner who brought shame, or Mary, the untouchable virgin. Both archetypes erased the fullness of feminine complexity and taught generations to internalize limitations. Across cultures and centuries, female power, fluid, cyclical, intuitive, was a threat to linear, control-driven systems. It was power rooted in life cycles, emotional intelligence, creation, and relational wisdom. Patriarchal systems didn't simply attempt to dominate women. They redefined, criminalized them, creating narratives that justified suppression. Think about this. Fear of women was really fear of what cannot be controlled. Life itself, death, the mysterious forces between, and the wisdom that guides them. Societies feared cycles, intuitions, the creativity inherent in half of the humanity, enacting laws, myth, and violence to suppress it. Yet the very traits they try to erase, our intuition, creativity, relational intelligence, and ability to hold life, remain the deepest, most magnetic source of feminine power today. As human societies transitioned from hunter-gatherer collective to agricultural empires and war-focused civilizations, the balance of power began to tilt dramatically. Male roles in warfare, territorial defense, and conquest became glorified and institutionalized, while the one-centered role of women in spiritual, societal, and economic life were restricted, redefined, and often erased. When land, livestock, and wealth became the foundation of survival, controlling women's bodies and autonomy became the strategy to secure legitimate heirs and maintain hierarchical power. Women's movement, choices, and even knowledge were increasingly policed, codified into law, and embedded in social norms. Power shifted not only in society but in myth and religion. Goddesses, once worshipped as central figures of creation and wisdom and life, were either subordinated, sublimed, or erased. In Sumer, Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war, who once embodied wholeness and complexity, gradually lost prominence as male deities like Anu and Enlil took center stage. In Greece, Gaia, the Mother Earth and source of life, was overshadowed by Zeus, the patriarchal sky god and king of the pantheon. Female deities were increasingly confined to supportive roles symbolizing fertility, domesticity, or nurturing, while true authority and strategy were coded as masculine trait. This whole thing wasn't just spiritual shift. It reshaped the entire social fabric. Laws, rituals, myths, and customs systematically embedded the restriction and control of women. Once central pillars of community, wisdom, and creation, women were redefined as absent, secondary, and submissive, while male-dominated hierarchies became normalized. Think about this. The rise of patriarchy was not inevitable. It was a calculated rewriting of history, myth, and divinity. By tracing these shifts, we can see the vast reserves of power that were lost, hidden, or suppressed. And in recognizing this, we glimpse path to reclaiming feminine authority, restoring balance, and honoring the life-giving, wisdom-bearing force women have always carried. Now, why I think that this story matters. The dawn of the feminine reminds us a lost memory, a time when women were not sidelined, but they were central, not secondary, but sovereign. Society once recognized the feminine as the keepers of life, wisdom, and spiritual insight, guiding communities and through creation, growth, and renewal. Understanding this history also demystifies patriarchy. It wasn't inevitable, natural, or permanent, it was constructed. And if it was built, it can be unbuilt. Systems of controls were designed to suppress women's power, our intuition, creativity, attuned to cycles, and embodied knowledge. But these gifts were not weaknesses. They were vital force that could restore balance in a world dominated by linear thinking, competition, and disconnection. Consider the threads of feminine power still alive today. Artists, writers, and innovators who created worlds and ideas that shift cultures. Healers and teachers who carry ancestral knowledge of body, mind, and spirit. Women who lead with empathy, emotional intelligence, and relational wisdom, often changing organizations, communities, and movements from within. And think about it, the feminine is cyclical, intuitive, and life-giving. It thrives in connection, nurtures creativity, and sustains lives, often in ways that cannot be quantified or controlled. To reclaim it, it's not about reversing hierarchies, it's about restoring balance, remembering that power once lived in collaboration, insight, and wholeness. So when we remember that once the world bowed to the feminine, we are invited to ask not how to dominate, not how to compete, but how to honor her fully, integrate her wisdom, and allow balance to return back in our societies, our lives, and ourselves. So, my dear friends, I truly want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for lending me your ears and your hearts. Let this message sink because this is really, truly very important. And please like, comment, and share this with someone who would appreciate this knowledge. And until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and always go beyond the mind.